Please don't.
Good evening, good evening. Thank you so much for coming. There's still some seats up here in the front, and we can always get more chairs if you need it. So welcome to Brooks Memorial Library. It's great to see all of you tonight. We have so much going on this week. I should have just told everybody, bring a sleeping bag, you can stay. Because, I happen to know there's one person in this room that actually came for tomorrow night's program, but when she found out this was happening, she decided to stay. So just come any night this week and you'll have a blast. So tonight we are lucky, we have Dr. Tortolani, but before we start, I just wanted to let you know some of the other things that are happening this week and next at the library. And then next week we have Reeve Lindbergh coming to town, which is very exciting. And she'll be here Wednesday, April 3rd, and she'll be talking about her book, Two Lives, that talks about the story of her family. And then for dessert, we literally have dessert. On Friday, April 5th, we'll be having our second fundraiser, all the dessert you can eat, and all the raffle prizes you can win. And it is a fundraiser and friend-raiser and fundraiser for the Friends of the Brooks Memorial Library who bring us so many of these wonderful programs. And now, we're so happy to have the wonderful and distinguished Dr. Tortolani to talk to us about his experiences in Vietnam. So.
Thank you very much, Star. Thanks for not embarrassing me in any way. It's so nice to have you all here. And can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate you coming out tonight. And I'd like to also thank the staff of Brooks Memorial Library for helping set this up, and BCTV for being here. Thank you very much. Most of you probably know me. I see a lot of friends here. My name is Bob Tortolani, and I'm a recently retired, year and a half ago, physician in Brattleboro, and family physician. So why are we here tonight? I think you're here tonight because you're curious, and what's this all about? I'm anxious to share with you my experiences of 50 years ago, 50 to 51 years ago. When I took these slides and the video, actually moving pictures, I had no idea it'd be shown to anybody but my own family. But a lot of people obviously did not come back from the Vietnam War, and in a sense, I think when I talk about this experience, I speak for those people who cannot speak anymore. And I think it's important to know as much as possible about that Vietnam War situation. If we look back on 1968, we can remember what a turbulent year that was. Martin Luther King's assassination, Robert Kennedy's assassination, the turbulence at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and probably 2,000 or 3,000 or more troops going to Vietnam, coming back from Vietnam every week. Approximately just about 50 years ago today, we had the peak number of American troops in Vietnam. It was 535,000 men and women were serving in Vietnam in March of 1969, and that was the highest number. 2.6 million American men and women served in Vietnam. 75% of those people were volunteers, 25% were draftees. And whether those people serving over there believed it was the right thing to be there, everyone did his best to both serve his country and to try to get home alive. I mean, those were things that help his fellow soldier over there. I mean, people over there were certainly aware of how difficult it was on the home front and the turbulence of the home front. But at any rate, I was a physician there. I had the privilege of being with an infantry battalion in the 1st Cav Division. One of the only things we had a chance to do was actually choose what unit we were with. When we got there, we were able to choose from a bunch of different units, and I had heard so much about the 1st Cav Division, I wanted to be with them. And I was, a battalion has about 1,000 men, and about 500 of those people are actually rifle soldiers. They like to be called grunts. They were out in the field. and 500 were support. My job as a primary care physician there was basically to support the real docs in the field. Those were the medics. There were 25 of them, 5 in each company, rifle company, another 15 in kind of the rear area, and those people were the people that I supported along with all the other soldiers. And I did a lot of primary care, I did a lot of preventive medicine, I did sick call each day. I went from place to place by helicopter to see to help the medics basically triage to decide whether people had to come back to a hospital, see how sick they were. They're injured. I very rarely in that position saw many acute casualties. Occasionally. My last 4 months over there, I was with 3 other physicians in a small triage center, and that's when I had the experience of seeing a lot of people, casualties. But the most formative period was with the infantry battalion, getting to know the people. Unfortunately, in that battalion of 1,000, about 90 were killed in the 8 months I was with them, and about 300 were injured. So the casualty rate was very, very high. We were in places where there was a lot of fighting, and a lot of people that I knew, didn't do so well with it. So at any rate, I'm going to show. A lot of us had cameras. 35 millimeter cameras were very small. You could stick it in your pocket. Inexpensive. You could take pictures very easily when you had a few minutes here and there. Very few people actually took moving pictures. I realized how unique that was, but I just don't see many other people who were in Vietnam with moving pictures. So you're actually going to be among probably no more than 300 or 400 people who have seen these moving pictures, 22 minutes of them, and a lot of them from helicopters, some of them in the forward area, some of them in the rear area, but you'll get a good sense. So you'll have a chance to go through these 80 slides, which is the number, because I had to pick 500 of them, and I picked 80 to weave a little story. And then the films, and then there'll be about 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A if anybody has any questions, okay? So I do have a question. Are there any veterans in the audience? Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much for serving the country. How many of you are family members of veterans? Okay, great. Okay. And how many of you, in addition, know veterans or have friends who are veterans? Great. All right. So it seems like everybody has a veteran or more in his life, and thank you very much for supporting all veterans. There are 21 or so million veterans in the United States, and they all deserve our respect and our help and our comfort and our support, and appreciate the very fact you're here tonight, and we'll go ahead and start. Okay. All right. Probably hold the questions until later. We'll figure out how much light we need here. Okay. All right. I start with this is a rear area. This would be an area where people are in the rear area. 4,000 to 5,000 people would be in a rear base like this. I believe this is Tainan. I started with because it's a nice picture of a helicopter, and helicopters are a very important part of what happens in Vietnam. When I first got to Vietnam, I came to this place where, as I said, you get your uniform, you can choose where you want to go if possible. And I was kind of blown away. It looked pretty nice there. And then, I'm in this period. I'm 26 years old. I just got there. It's a real experience, obviously. It looked pretty okay. And so we made some choices. I got into the 1st Cav Division, and we went on from there. And that's my first picture of Vietnam from the air. It's very green. By the way, it's a very beautiful country. And those people who are lucky enough to go to Vietnam now, I think, have a wonderful experience. It was beautiful then, but of course there was a lot going on. This is the area of the 1st Cav Division. That's the Cav patch, the famous yellow Cav patch with the stallion there in the middle. And that's the first that's the first rear area that I saw, in addition to just coming in and going to the resettlement area. had this picture taken. I'm still in that first 4 days. This was an interesting sign because it just showed California. It was funny. I asked somebody to take the picture. I was still in that period of time where this is all an exciting thing. I'm four days into this experience and haven't really kind of figured out what's going on yet. And then we fly to the northern part of Vietnam, and I sort of start to feel, well, this is not looking quite as nice. This is Camp Evans, which is an old Marine camp from the air, and get a bit of closer look. It's a tent city. When it's monsoon season, that's all mud, much like it is in Brattleboro. When it's dry, it's there's a lot of dust. It's either dusty or muddy. And the thing about Camp Evans, which was only about 18 miles from Hue and played a big role in the Battle of Hue in 1968, as men from this particular camp went into Hue and were involved in the fighting. But this place was a pretty ugly camp and virtually was all tents. Sorry, that's a little bit dark, but in the distance is the mountains of the A Shau Valley. The A Shau Valley was a very turbulent period. The Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through that area, and it was basically the enemy had that area to themselves, pretty much. That was basically a battalion, an aid station that was not my aid station, but another aid station of another group. And this was my little aid station. In the 3 months I was here before we went to the down south, this was our aid station. It's pretty, as you can see, it's pretty sophisticated. You'll get a sense for it. There's a few medicines there. There's a few bottles of this and that. We have secretarial help here. And I'll show you this is where I examine patients. First of all, I apologize for the picture, not very good. I didn't use the right lighting, but that's where I had people lie down if they needed to lie down. I had a few books I brought from home. And these are some of the medics from the rear area. And one of the things I want to say about the American fighting man, he knows how to have a good time when he's not working. It's very impressive how they keep their spirits up. And this is a monkey that was obtained as a a lot of the soldiers had either dogs in the rear area or monkeys or various pets just to keep them, to keep them company. Occasionally we'd have a football game, when we're not busy, anything to keep the morale up. Again, the mountains of the A Shau Valley. These are some of my medic friends again who are having some snacks and probably some steaks. It's amazing. If you know the right NCO, they know how to come up with food from somewhere. It's amazing. So every once in a while you'll have a cookout, and these are very good for the morale. This is a Vietnam village, and there was something called a cordon and search. Basically, you'd have, and this is at the end of that, you'd have a number of soldiers who would kind of surround a village and interrogate the people who might be enemy soldiers. This was at the end of one of those events. There was no violence occurred at all there. And these kids are running not because we're going to give them medical care, but because we had some candies to give out. And children anywhere in the world are going to come running if you've got something sweet to give them. And I think we did provide medical care in these Vietnamese villages. Once or twice a week we'd go out for a couple of hours. And actually, if someone appeared very ill, we would be able to get them back to a Vietnamese hospital, which was near our base. This is an area where we're interacting with Vietnamese people. This is a beautiful little Vietnamese girl. Again, I'm sorry about the color. It's hard to get to see her face, but she's an absolutely beautiful kid. In October of 1968, the entire 1st Cav Division, which is about 18 or 20,000 people, was ordered to move down from I Corps, which is the northern part of Vietnam, to 3 Corps, which is the area in kind of the middle of Vietnam. And our particular battalion of 1,000 men worked out of the Tay Ninh West, which was the base camp of about 6,000 or 8,000 people, and you'll see more of that later. But we are in the process now of picking up our medical supplies, breaking down and then going, our entire 18 or so thousand people going down south. This is where a bunch of them are getting ready to go and getting on these C-130s. Probably there were about 300 for each of these, so there were probably 50 to 60 of these loads of soldiers, and huge amounts of supplies we all went by plane down into the southern part of Vietnam. They were actually anticipating a Tet Offensive repeat in 1969. You know, the Tet Offensive was 68. So they decided to bring this division that I was in down and to kind of have a blocking around Saigon. And we were northwest of Saigon, about 75 miles. Another group was just north, another group was northeast of Saigon. So this is where I spent the vast majority of my time in Vietnam, in Tay Ninh province. And that mountain is a monadnock, you know, our famous monadnock over there in New Hampshire. But any mountain that comes out of a plain is called a monadnock, and that's the mountain of the Black Virgin. It's Nui Ba Din is the name of it, and it was always pretty much owned by the enemy, not by us, except we had a camp at the very top. This is a picture from again, Nui Ba Din in the background, a picture from the air of the Tay Ninh West Base Camp, which had 5,000 to 10,000 people on it. And we would work out from there and have something called fire bases. I'll tell you more about that later. This is a picture of basically the landscape of this part of Vietnam. Very flat, and rivers coursing through it, a lot of jungle in various places. This is the outskirts of Tay Ninh City, which is a city of about 20,000, which is about 5 miles from the base camp. There was a hospital there, and I was able to work in that hospital for half a day a week, which was a lot of enjoyment for me. Again, another picture of the river there. This is a very interesting building. It's the seat of the Cao Dai religion, which is a religion of about 2 or 3 million people in Vietnam. And this religion actually had its own army. They had 20,000 people in their own little army, and pretty much everybody left them alone on both sides. You know, they were on their own. Very, very interesting religion. This is a picture in the base camp of Vietnamese civilians who came into the base camp and did work, usually filling sandbags. And sandbags were very helpful to put anywhere around where you might be, because we were constantly being rocketed, and if a rocket hit your area where you were sleeping, if you didn't have sandbags around, you'd be in much more danger. So there were sandbags all over the place, and anytime they were incoming, you'd go to a bunker which is covered, you know, surrounded by sandbags. These folks also did the laundry. They were paid, you know, small amounts. We have no idea how many of these people were actually, you know, on the other side. You just never knew who was fighting for who over there. But at any rate, these people were employed. They were very nice. They were very pleasant, and they were very efficient. Vietnamese people are very, very hardworking people and very efficient. Again, some Vietnamese people. Such some pictures from basically the base camp, just to get a little sense for. This would be the truck. They leave at night, come in the morning. People would just, you know, friends with them. Okay, that actually is a picture of a little, like my bureau in the place where I slept when I was in the rear area, and it was getting close to Christmas, so I got some Christmas packages, which is really nice. Yeah, and I have a little Christmas tree here and there. We try to make it as nice as possible, and then there were lots of puppies around. There were very few veterinarians, so if a dog or a cat got injured, the doctors would do their best to sew him up and stuff like that. It was kind of interesting. But there were lots of animals around, I'll just put it that way. This is how you took a shower. There was no running water. You'd heat up the water in these buckets, in these 55-gallon containers, and then you'd let gravity do its thing. And that was how you took a shower. There was no running water, of course, no septic, no nothing there. Everything was very, very basic. We did find out, I just found out recently that Agent Orange was in the water. Everybody was drinking Agent Orange during your whole tour there, and there's a lot of people who were exposed to this who have illnesses associated with Agent Orange. If one person was a little better at doing haircuts than another person, he would be chosen as the haircut guy for his group. And people would just basically give each other haircuts. And actually, that probably was on a forward. I have a feeling that this picture was taken at what's called a fire base, because these forward bases are called fire bases. They'd have 3 howitzers on them, and the other companies would work out from the fire base. The 3 artillery pieces would act as support as long as they were within 10 to 15 miles or so of this base. And there'd be 1 rifle company which would be involved with security on the fire base, and the other 4 companies would work out, basically for security. This is a typical fire base. You'll see pictures, moving pictures, more about that later. But this would be a base. There'd be 100 people on the perimeter for security. At night, you'd have barbed wire, and you'd have 3 artillery pieces, and these were the pretty vulnerable. They were oftentimes attacked at night, and oftentimes they were occasionally overrun, where the enemy would get in the perimeter. This is another picture of another fire base. We had them all over the place. There would be at least 3 for each battalion. I'm sorry, 3 for each, 1 for each battalion usually, and so the division would have about 9 of these fire bases at any one time. This is the very top of that mountain, that Nui Baden. You can see there's something there that looks like a helicopter pad there. This is the only part of that mountain that was owned by the American troops. The rest of the mountain was all in enemy hands throughout that whole time. Another, oops, going backwards, I think. Okay, this is a forward base, a fire base out in the field, and again, you'd have 1 company here and 4 companies working out from this fire base. And you basically set up tents, you'd have bunkers with sandbags in case you were hit. And another picture of the fire base. These things were oftentimes just kind of taken out of the jungle. You'd have a plane dropping bombs that would knock all the trees down. You'd have machines leveling it out, and then helicopters would bring in the artillery pieces, and you'd put up a defense, and that's how they did it. This is a very nice fellow by the name of Dave Niles. He was a company commander. Happily, we've just recently, in the last year, found each other again. He lives in Maine, and he was a really good guy and a very, very good company commander. And if you're a good commander, really care so much about your men, the way all these people did, your men will do anything for you. This is another company commander by the name of Costello, actually, and no relationship to Tom Costello. But anyway, another very nice guy who's very much loved by his men. And these next pictures are pictures of the Frog Grunts. They like to kind of have fun. I think sometimes they're about to go out on a maneuver, and there's a couple of guys going out, and they're pretty tough. There's no question. And again, this is even less than a fire base. This is an overnight position. Usually, men would start out at 5 in the morning. They break camp. and they'd start out after breakfast, 6:30, 7 as at daybreak, and then they would basically kind of go around the jungle in various places for 6 or 7 hours, and then around 1 in the afternoon they would break and set up a perimeter with something called claymore mines and barbed wire, and basically set up for the night. And it would be at this point where they'd get supplies, 3, 4 in the afternoon. I would go by helicopter from the fire base here. I would see any patients, any men that the medics wanted me to see. If anybody was sick enough or hurt, I would bring them back. Otherwise, just help them in every way I can. And try our best to not take them into the rear area unless they needed to be seen. But at any rate, it was enjoyable to go by helicopter out to these where the guys are in the field. And okay, this is a picture of helicopters that are probably lining up for something called a combat assault. When they were more about that later. This is a group of infantrymen going out from a base camp for some maneuver. I'm not sure what they were doing, but it just goes showing them going out. This is another group of men in the afternoon situation where they are in a jungle situation. They have men around them right now providing security, but they're getting ready for the night at this point. They probably would have just seen some of the people that the medics had chosen. This is the kind of thing where the helicopters depend on the signals both by radio and also by these smoke grenades to tell you that that's a friendly position, that's where you want to land. And when you're they would pick out a spot that was flat for the helicopters. And these are propaganda things that are left by the Viet Cong that were found in one of the villages. Perhaps that's something that can be read. I can't read it too well, but it basically says, go home, don't leave us alone. That's the Viet Cong flag there. And propaganda has been part of fighting forever. And okay. Now this is a lot of helicopters. These are the Huey helicopters, so the helicopters that move supplies and men. And the 1st Cavalry Division had lots of helicopters, and we get a little chance to see them a little closer. Another picture of helicopters. Obviously, they're pretty vulnerable. If you get either mortars or rockets, they can destroy a lot of these helicopters. This is more of a close-up of a helicopter. They really are amazing machines. This is an observation helicopter, which goes low, goes slow, has very little armament, and is very vulnerable. And their job was to try to spot the enemy, and so that people could go after them. These helicopters were oftentimes hit by small arms fire. A lot of the people were either hurt or killed when these things went down. But people who flew in those things were extremely brave. Okay, this is a Cobra, a very heavily armed, basically a very heavily armed helicopter. And those are rockets on either side, and it was a minigun. The miniguns were made in Burlington, actually. They fired, I think 3,000 rounds a minute. And they're made right in GE, right in Burlington, Vermont. But the rockets were shot from either side of this helicopter. This is the inside of a Chinook, which is a very large helicopter which holds up to 30 men and can carry artillery pieces. You might see that. This is a picture of a helicopter that had either gone down for mechanical reasons or was shot down. I don't know anything about what happened to the crew. Another picture of a scene near Chi Minh City. And here's one of my nurse friends holding an M16, and there's an interpreter. Once a week we got to go and work in with Vietnamese in a it's called a Tay Ninh Provincial Hospital. And you don't see many nurses with M16s, but that's the way they did it there. And there she is with a much more comfortable thing in her hands, which is a little baby. Yeah, yeah. And an unhappy kid. Any kid's going to be unhappy up on the table. One of my friends was interviewing with an interpreter, a Vietnamese woman. He and I worked together commonly. And this young lady had tuberculosis of the skin. Tuberculosis is a disease, luckily, we don't see it here very often, but tuberculosis can affect just about any organ in the body. It's really an amazing disease that fortunately we don't see much anymore. This is the inside of the provincial hospital, which was built by the French, probably in the early 1900s. And the people oftentimes, their whole family would move in when they went into the hospital. They would expect people to just move in with them. That was me examining a Vietnamese fellow. Don't remember very much about it. This is a young woman who set up a snack bar near the base, and there were lots of people selling soft drinks and things like that. And this is a picture. These young ladies from the Red Cross were called donut dollies. They would come and bring donuts and basically come and say hello to the guys. And the Red Cross provided things like that, blankets, food, things like that. Just all these things were kind of morale things, which was always good. This was a very ugly special forces camp called Khartoum, which I took this picture right after we landed. There were some incoming rounds, and I remember jumping into a hole while these rounds were coming in. The hole was filled with ammunition, so it would be clear that anywhere in that hole that had that round, I would not be here giving this talk tonight. I feel very lucky I didn't get hit. That is some medical equipment, surgical equipment that was captured in from a Vietnamese bunker where they had a hospital underground. The Vietnamese had multiple large hospitals in various places, a lot of underground hospitals, amazingly sophisticated underground things. This was the place where I slept in the rear area during my last 4 months in Vietnam when I was with 3 other doctors in a casualty treatment area. That is the helicopter pad where the casualties would come in. You'll see more of this with the film. That's a helicopter bringing in a person, a casualty. There are 2 soldiers bringing someone on a stretcher. You'll see this better later. Okay, the last 3 pictures are taken, it looks very different. This is not Vietnam, this is Australia. They had something called R&R, Rest and Recreation. We would go for 1 week. I became friends of the fellow who's kind of in the middle with the shorts. He's a fellow by the name of Charles Thornley. He was in the Australian Air Force. He loved Americans, and during the entire Vietnam War, he had between 600 and 700 Americans stayed with him at his ranch and his farm near Sydney, about 40 miles from Sydney. He was a really great guy, and we became lifelong friends. That's a picture of the Sydney harbor, and a beautiful sunset, and completely different. I remember, believe it or not, how exciting it was to see a flush toilet in my 9th month. It's just amazing to flush a toilet when you've had no running water for 9 months, and it's fascinating. And things you miss. And okay, so now we're going to go to the films. So this is where I need some help.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's over.
Yeah, and this is about a 22-minute film. Thank you so much. And then we will have some Q&A if anybody's interested.
Well, did you take the film?
I'm sorry?
Did you take this?
I did. I was able to buy a small moving a Super 8 camera, and I took these pictures. And the interesting thing is not too many other people did that. I didn't realize that at the time. And again, I had no idea I'd be showing this to anybody but my family. It just so happens that I think it's useful to see these things. And again, I think that it's important to know what went on there as much as you can. I took pictures from helicopters in rear areas and forward areas and the whole gamut, and you'll see. Okay, this is a picture of that same mountain, that Monadnock called Nui Badin, and this was the first thing, I like sunrises and sunsets, so I think it's a good way to start this. I just put the things together. Now this would be Tainan West, or the big base camp that had 5,000 men on it, and that's not slow motion. That's kind of the way the helicopter went as it was coming in. And a lot of barbed wire. This barbed wire is serious stuff, and that's to try to protect you at night from attacks. These are just scenes of people living. There's a family. This would be a Montagnard family. The Montagnards were mountain people that the Vietnamese didn't particularly like. They were very, very helpful to Americans. They were kind of the Aborigine people of Vietnam. They called them the mountain people. They were very, very nice and very good fighters. They served as allies to the United States in Vietnam. And again, this is a rear area. This would be the, yeah. Okay, this is the, again, Tainan West base camp. And I think, yeah, the children are everywhere. Every chance they get, they play around. Soldiers doing their thing. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Some people, I think this was a time, kind of a little bit of time out, and the children were just having a fun time watching the soldiers. Okay. I would sit right behind the door gunner. There'd be a door gunner on either side with a machine gun, and I would sit in the middle, and I would basically put this over the shoulder of the door gunner. Again, this is the Tainan West, the big base camp, and very commonly was rocketed during the day. Usually the enemy picked 6 o'clock at night when we were eating to rocket you, very typically. And they cleared that jungle there to have a field of fire, as they call it. And then you get out about a quarter of a mile, and then you get pretty dense jungle. Okay, we're lower there. There's Nui Baden. Those holes. I'm sorry?
What is the white?
Well,
I keep wanting to call it snow.
No. It's just fields. There's fields. I'm sorry. There's some green, and the white is just another color of the field.
Okay.
Yeah, different colors of fields. Actually, pretty. It was quite beautiful. And in this area, there would be rice paddies. There'd be fields. There'd be jungle. Okay, this would be a nighttime. They'd got guys. These were medics of mine. They had come in after being in the jungle during the day, and they would be setting up at night. And then we're going to a different place, going back and forth. I would take, 30 seconds and then go somewhere else. So this is the rear area again. Anytime you see Vietnamese people or Montagnards, that's the rear area. So that's a woman who's doing the laundry again. People were not, for the most part, very used to seeing anybody with a moving picture camera. But now these kids are really a lot of fun. These, again, are Montagnard children. That fellow in the orange is a real ham. The kids are just a lot of fun. It's so enjoyable to have children around when you're in a tough situation. make things a lot more fun. And these kids were just great. I couldn't stop taking pictures of them. Yeah. Oh dear. Still makes you laugh, seeing them 50 years later. Yeah. Now, I said before that you'd have these large, that's a Sikorsky helicopter, and it's bringing in an artillery piece. They're just setting up one of these forward fire support bases. And again, 3 of those howitzers would be, and that's, I actually had somebody take a picture of me. That's, forgive me for that one. That's, okay, again, rear area, taking off, probably going to see some people in the field. And it was really a lot of fun to be on helicopters. I have to tell you, helicopters made the time go by faster, and it was enjoyable to be on them. And we had so many helicopters, it's easy to get a ride anytime. That's the South Vietnamese flag. They had a base, apparently a small command area on our base. I don't remember anything about it, but that's the Vietnamese flag. This is some jungle not too far from our base, with a little clearing. Gets pretty shaky. Now this is the defoliated area. Now Agent Orange is the defoliant, and all those holes are craters from bombs. This very organized forest there, that's a Michelin rubber plantation. And actually a lot of fighting went on in areas like this. These are parts of the plantation, not that far from where we were. Again, this is a fire base, a fire support base. And this is one of our fire support bases. I believe this was probably New Year's Eve, I think, as I recall. And just setting up for the night. Again, there'd be one rifle company for security, and there'd be 3 howitzers on that base, providing support for people in the field. And these were really pretty vulnerable, these fire support bases. They were very commonly attacked. Luckily, not when I was there. It's another one of my medics, yeah.
Safe to assume it's about 100 degrees there.
The temperature,
Shirt on?
yeah, I mean, most people had their shirts off most of the time. It was very hot, yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, skin cancer is a big problem because people had their shirts off all the time. And whenever they could, when they're in the rear area, once they get down for the day, they take their shirts off. And it's really hot. That's a Chinook carrying an artillery piece. That's the machine gun of the door gunner.
Is that a cleared area?
That's a clear area. It's not been cleared. See, these are B-52 strikes. See how that bomb?
Yeah.
That's a B-52 strike. And that's probably the thing that was the most devastating thing that the enemy had to face. Because they come out of nowhere. And okay, once again, the machine gunner, and lots of rivers, lots of jungle, lots of green. And as high as we were not particularly vulnerable to having anybody shoot at us. That looks, I think that's a fire support base again. These areas are so big that you could swim in them. These are, they'd fill with water and people would swim in them. It's another fire support base. And yeah. There are little tiny villages all over the place. I mean, there may be 10, 15, 20 Vietnamese houses in these areas. Now this again is Tay Ninh West, that's the big town. And this is the road that went between our base and Tay Ninh West, which is the where the provincial hospital was and where the business section was. It's a town of about 20,000, pretty nice little town actually. Yeah, the lower you are, the faster you look like you're going. Okay, this is the grounds of the provincial hospital, which, again, for me personally was very enjoyable to just spend a little time with Vietnamese patients and interpreters, and there's some Vietnamese police, and that was my friend we saw before doing an interview. He's a fellow from New Orleans. That's my nurse friend, probably peeking out. She's shy, there she is. And again, children, anywhere where there's a camera, children show up. And back in our rear area, I think that we're getting closer to the time now when I switched from being in an infantry battalion to being with 3 other doctors in the casualty treatment area. That's coming to that pretty soon. Again, some Vietnamese people working for us. That's our cav patch, famous cav patch. That's one of the hooches. We call those places hooches where the medics hung out. He was the chief medic. Yeah. Young American men can find a lot of ways to have fun. No matter how bad things are. Always kidding each other. Come on. Oh dear. This is a very nice fellow, young lieutenant, a medical service officer. Now this is the road going from the base camp to downtown Tay Ninh. And of course you couldn't do this at night. That would not be safe at night because the enemy's out at night, but during the day you could do this. And you can see the various forms of transportation. I think there's a water buffalo in the fields there. Yeah. That's a lot of bicycles and motorized bicycles, a few cars. Kind of a clean, nice little town actually. Shops. Some South Vietnamese soldiers there. Again, this would be the spring of 1969. This would be just about 50 years ago. That's the river going through the town. That's the gates of the provincial hospital again. And it looks like a Vietnamese family, yeah. That's a traditional Vietnamese dress. It's called an áo dai, the long white dress. Now, you'll have to forgive me, I got captivated by this person. So, yeah, don't forget I was 26 and, you know.
What
All
was
right.
the name of that village again?
Tay Ninh, Tayninh, yeah, Tay Ninh. It's a pretty well-known town in Vietnam. Now this is the last 3 or 4 months I was with 3 other physicians and we took care of casualties in this heavily bunkered building. And it was nice to be with other physicians. And this is where I saw a lot of people who had casualties and who were injured. And we had a hospital about 2 miles a small hospital 2 miles from where we were on this base, that with 3 or 4 surgeons, and they would do life and limb kind of surgery. And this is a little downtime in the afternoon. Again, creating skin cancer all the time, a lot of ultraviolet, and really does come back to haunt you. These are the doctors and dentists, and this fellow's having fun with me. He's saluting. That's our bunker right there, heavily bunkered. We'd have 4 physicians, 10, 12 medics. The helicopters would come in. We'd use ambulances to bring people from here to the surgical hospital if we needed to. You can see all the sandbags all around that place. We did have a time when we had a lot of casualties over 24 hours, about over 100, and they just kept coming and coming. This is what they would do. This would be a time when I had a little bit of time. I made a point to try to take the pictures. Again, never knowing I'd be showing these pictures to anybody, but just did it. And I would bring people in from the field. These people got injured somewhere, out in the jungle. They would be in a small, what we call firefight, and they'd be sometimes mortar, sometimes just injured by anything that could happen. So we did have abilities to start blood, and this guy was probably pretty badly injured. And we were bringing him right now to the surgical hospital. We would have called there and said that we've got a person who's unstable. We had a bigger hospital about 30 miles away by air, but again, if you didn't think it was appropriate, you'd try to stabilize in our place and then bring them to the surgeons right down the street. It was about a mile away, I should say, not 2 miles. Again, constantly you'd have people going out and bringing people from the helicopters and to us. We would also sometimes have enemy soldiers who were injured, and they'd bring the enemy soldiers in too. That happened not too commonly, but during bigger battles that would happen sometimes. Now, these are 2 doctor friends of mine. Sometimes they put up with me taking their pictures, other times not so much. We're getting toward the end, another 5 minutes or so. And I think this is the thing that gives you the best picture of how we were transporting people from the field to the rear area where they would get stabilized and decided whether they could stay in our little hospital. We had about 20 beds, whether they'd have to go to a bigger facility. The helicopter pilots are incredibly brave, oftentimes putting themselves at great danger to pick up the injured people. That was a dog that I actually worked on. Got a pretty bad laceration, and kindly let me sew him up. This is where we slept. There are a couple buddies of mine who are reading, some downtime. You don't work all the time, you have some downtime. Sometimes they put up with me, other times not so much. Not too happy with me. Enough is enough. Yeah, he's okay. And yeah, I'd rather. He's okay too. Sorry, that's me getting skin cancer. Yeah, that's what we did. We just baked, Again, that's the cab patch with the Red Cross there, and some, again, Vietnamese people who did work for us. Constantly filling sandbags, endless work. And but life-saving, those sandbags can really save your life. We would get incoming rounds most every day, and they came from anywhere between 10 and 20 miles away, and they were called 122 millimeter rockets, and they tend to know when we ate our meals, so they would try to get a lucky shot. And okay, this is a little bit rainier time of the year. You can see that. A water tower, which not very beautiful, but that's functional. And again, trying to have fun. They would have movies at night. A lot of nights they would have a chance to have volleyball, sometimes football. Again, downtime. Whenever it's downtime, anything you could do for morale's purposes, that was very important. Food is important, meal is important, and games are important. And that's it. Okay. So, lights. Okay. Well, thank you for sitting through that. And I guess this would be the time. It's 8 o'clock. We have about 20 or 30 minutes, or as much time as we need for any questions, if anybody has any questions. You can ask anything you want about anything about the Vietnam War. Yes, please.
Did you volunteer to serve?
I didn't have to volunteer. I knew I was going to go. Every single physician in my age group went. If I had a choice, I could try to get into the Air Force. I kind of liked the Air Force. I couldn't get in the Air Force. The Navy, I like ships, but I wouldn't be on a ship. I would be in a Marine. I would be with Marines if I were with the Navy. So we all knew we were going to be in there. So I just got my orders. Just waited for our orders. You didn't have to sign up. You were every single physician my age we had in our internship. Unless you had a family, you wouldn't necessarily go to Vietnam. If you were single or you didn't have children, the chances are you went to Vietnam. I remember being with 5,000 other people, doctors, who had just finished their internship. 5,000. Everybody went to Vietnam. Everybody.
Any
You know.
women?
I'm sorry?
Any women?
A lot of women nurses. I never saw a woman physician. And as you remember, there were very few women physicians in 1963. I had 5 in my class. I never saw a woman physician over there. No, it's a good question, though. The nurses were great. There were quite a few nurses, and they were, they really worked hard. And anybody who was over in Vietnam, in whatever level, they were very affected by the experience. There was absolutely no question between the cultural experience, what they went through as healthcare professionals or soldiers, whatever you were doing over there, you were affected by that experience. You cannot not be affected by it. And anybody who is in an experience like that is definitely anti-war. You want to do anything you can to avoid wars, So I think you'll find that anybody who's been to Vietnam will be quite a pacifist and want to do everything in his power to encourage negotiations, encourage anything short of wars, because, in my mind, the most patriotic people, the best people on each side, a lot of the good people on either side, kind of are the patriotic people who, as I said, 75% of the people over there volunteered, 25% were drafted, and those people experienced this and have truly become lifelong pacifists, I'm sure. I mean, there's just got to be a better way than wars. Wars are just useless, unfortunately, but we've managed to get into them over the years in more than we should. But for the survival of our species, we need to keep figuring out how to not have wars. Anyway, The Vietnamese people over there, very, very hardworking. The country's beautiful. I understand people have gone back there. A lot of soldiers have gone back to Vietnam and found it a very healing experience. I haven't done that, but thought about it. Haven't done that yet. But I have a lot of respect for it's a beautiful, beautiful country, and the Vietnamese people are very smart, and they're very, very hardworking, and so yeah. So yes, hi. Yep, you're good. Yes, you are.
But just wondering, did you ever have to go out on the battlefield to help patients, or they're always just brought in?
Well, as I said, the battlefield was everywhere. We had people injured in the rear area by rocket. Many people were killed by rockets and mortars in the rear area. Okay, so occasionally I would be in the rear area, and I would be involved with helping to treat people who had just gotten hurt that way. I would go out ordinarily I would not be walking through the jungle with a rifle. I didn't have to do that. Those people who were at greatest risk were walking through the jungle with rifles and were getting into trouble with other people from the other side with rifles, and they would have their interactions. And those people would be airlifted from where they were hurt to the rear area if they survived. And they would come to me, and that, as I said, in the last 4 months, I would be treating people with gunshot wounds and that kind of thing, and stabilizing and then sending people wherever they needed to go. I was primarily doing preventive kind of things, skin problems, trying to deal with various infections. I would see people in the rear area, I'd see people in the forward area, I'd see people on the fire bases. And I like to be active. I like to move around. So it was good to be on the helicopters all the time. I was in the right division because it allowed me to move around. Yeah, Rich.
Did you stay in touch with any of the doctors that you worked with?
No. Okay, the question was, have I stayed in touch with any of the physicians I work with? The answer is I have not. No. I will repeat the question. Yes?
You mentioned that there was Agent Orange in the waters.
There was, I'm sorry?
You mentioned there was Agent Orange in waters?
Yes.
Drinking that?
Yes.
Did you ever notice any circumstances in which there were effects of the soldiers within the time period that your tour of duty?
The first question was, had I mentioned that there was Agent Orange in the water supply? I found that out within the last month, believe it or not. I didn't know that. I know I was...
You have no suspicion, no suspicion.
No suspicion that it was in the water. But it's now acknowledged that it was in the water we were drinking all the time. So people were exposed to Agent Orange by breathing in and touching it. And there have been a lot of diseases that have been associated with exposure to Agent Orange. I think it's one of the ironies of the fact that it was a nasty war. People were dealing with, the fact that this was an awful war. We shouldn't be there. The soldiers did the best job they could, tried to get home alive. And then they had to deal with all the effects of these toxins that they were exposed to. It's just kind of, in my mind, it's just like awful. It's just the soldiers did such a good job over there. I mean, I'm so proud of the job that the soldiers did. And believe me, I'm one of these people who says the soldiers on both sides are amazing. I mean, we just shouldn't be fighting because there are good people on both sides, and some of the best people on both sides are dying, and as a species we've got to survive, and it just isn't right. But the answer is I did not see any effects. I don't think we even knew. We kind of knew it wasn't good for the plants, trees. We should have thought it wasn't very good for us, or for the Vietnamese. Honestly, there were other things to worry about then, besides exposure to Agent Orange. It wasn't the big one. When you came back, it remains an issue because there's so many things associated with Agent Orange exposure. Yes?
of lately, I've become aware of a screening that they will do for Vietnam veterans for Agent Orange. And one of the things is that they take a blood sample.
A blood sample?
But I can't comprehend how they can find traces of Agent Orange within your blood. I don't quite understand.
I'm not familiar with that. I know there are more and more diseases. They've just associated diabetes, cardiovascular disease, prostate cancer, clearly to associate a lot of the lymphomas, a lot of cancers. There's just recently, right in our legislature right now, there's the burn pits that they use for human waste burning. That the legislature is dealing with a bill right now to see if we have to get all the Vermont veterans who've been exposed to those toxins in the air, the latest information, and there are studies on this right now, and some controversy about, the burning of human waste over there was just all the time, and they're now identifying the fact that there are toxic results, and the VA Veterans Administration right now is saying that those are only temporary. Other experts are saying there's some permanent effects. So, and to the credit of the Vermont legislature, there's a bill right now looking to keep informed all the Vermont citizens who were in Vietnam about the information about that. So, and that's in the legislature right now. I don't know if it's passed. I think it has. Yes, Dick.
Enemy Viet Cong, did
Yeah.
they target the helicopters? Did they have weaponry that they
They did.
developed specifically?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the harder things I remember, I was having lunch in mid-August of 1969, having lunch with a helicopter pilot. And this was about 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock. And he was talking about how he was going to go home, and he had a Volvo station wagon. Those were very popular in 1968, 69. So he was a helicopter pilot on a dust-off or a medevac, and he and his co-pilot went up to the site, and they were in triple tier, which very, very thick jungle, and they put down a hoist through the trees, and there was North Vietnamese snipers in the trees, and they shot and killed the pilot that I just had lunch with about 20 minutes earlier, and his co-pilot was able to take over and get the helicopter. They couldn't get the injured person out in that one. They had to take care of the enemy in the trees first, but that was that was awful. So they did target. Yes, they made every effort to target the helicopters that were getting the injured out. Yeah, unfortunately. They called, what that red thing is? That's a target. Yeah, that's what the helicopters people said. That red thing is the target. It's not something that you avoid, it's something you shoot at, unfortunately, but that's true. It was very sad for that young man to have that experience. That it was tough to hear that he had just died. We just had that conversation, but that happened a lot. People, you just saw it, and it was very hard to stay close to anybody because it was so large. There was a great chance that people you get close to would be killed suddenly, and it's just you just made a point to do whatever you could to help your buddies, but on a certain level not to get too close emotionally, because it's devastating when you keep losing friends over there. And so you tried to have a certain amount of distance emotionally, and that was pretty pervasive. And yes.
Was there any kind of ceremony that you would have when somebody was killed?
Yes.
Because their bodies went away to home, right?
Yes. Yeah. We had a lot of religious support. We had there were chaplains, priests. There were I don't remember there being any honestly Muslim people, but there were a lot of people. Mormons were a lot of non-combatants, and they always were able to go away on a Sunday. They had a religious ceremony for them. And we would always have a ceremony when people were lost, yes. They would have the helmet and the rifle in the ground, and they would always, have a ceremony, yes. That was very important. There's no question I'm not going to answer, no matter how hard it is. I'll do my best.
What was the training of the medics, like EMTs today?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I know a medic who actually went to medical school afterwards and practiced, in southern New Hampshire. Yeah, they were very well trained, probably 6-8 months. Certainly, yes, EMT training. And actually, it was a great reservoir of people who could stay in the healthcare professional realm when they came home. I don't know how many of them did, but I think a lot of them did. Very well trained, extremely brave, the bravest of the brave. I think I had 7 medics of the people I knew killed out of 40. Yeah, so the medics were particularly brave, and they would just do anything to get their buddies back. And they put themselves, they weren't carrying weapons. They would just do it. They were just the bravest, I think they also, a lot of them felt good about the fact they didn't have to, shoot at anybody else. They could just do things to help people, and that was a nice way to do it. And, it was hard. It was hard for the soldiers to actually, it's well known that it's very hard to train a soldier to actually shoot a gun at somebody else. It's just not natural to, even a soldier has to be trained well to do something that's very repulsive, and that is try to kill another human being. And there's a book called On Killing, which goes into that whole scenario in great detail, and it's very, very interesting. But the American soldiers were really trained very, very well. And the hard thing is untraining them when they come back. And we don't spend enough time untraining our soldiers when they return from this, the training of being in combat. And really, there's a lot of literature out there right now saying we should be spending much time untraining people once they return from combat. The warriors, we call them, the returning warriors have to be untrained so they can readjust to civilian life. And there's a great tradition among the Native American Indians and among the Greek soldiers 2,000, 3,000 years ago that they would have a long period of time of reentry into society once they had their battles, as opposed to just assuming they're going to be okay, because you're not okay. It's definitely you're not okay. You're trained to do things that are repulsive, and you have to be untrained. You have to really thoughtfully come back. The Native Americans would spend a week literally cleansing people physically and emotionally before they let them even interact with people, in their society. It's really refreshing. They knew these things years ago, but we don't do them very well now still. And so a lot of the soldiers had trouble with reentry, and I think people are learning, but we've still got a long way to go. We're not as good as a lot of the ancient peoples and the Native Americans. They did a better job than we're doing now. But anyway, we're hopefully learning, and maybe at a certain, we have to have a strong military, but those people who are actually trained have to be helped when they come back into society. It's a very, very important part of it. I'm on the board of an organization called the Warrior Connection, which does help soldiers, men and women who have developed emotional issues around their deployments, and if anybody does know a veteran who's having problems, this is at no charge to them. They spend a week in a retreat situation where it's really very effective thing that's done by the Warrior Connection group that I'm associated with. So if anybody does know anybody, you can certainly get in touch with me. The other thing I would say is that Bill Holliday, about 4 years ago, I did an oral history through him, through BCTV. And it's in rather significant detail, some of the things that I went through. And if anybody's interested, just Google my name, and you can get that. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. But Bill Holliday did a good job on that. And so I think there was another veteran or two who did that also, but that was part of the oral history thing for the Historical Society. Okay. Yes?
Just thinking that the way you described it, it sounds like these guys end up hating themselves.
Hating themselves. Yeah, I mean,
It's going to be very hard to deal with how you felt about, you've been meant to do this and you did it, and then
yeah. Well, I'm not sure it's so much hating yourself as some of that, I'm sure, feeling sad about experiences, feeling bad about things they've had to do. That's part of being a human, yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emotion that goes on, and it's very complicated, but we have to face the fact that it's a complicated reality, and we need to help. I think it was Eisenhower in 1945 said, if we're going to have our soldiers spend years in combat, we've got to really take care of them when they come back. And that was 1945. And combat fatigue, the things, the shell shock, all those things have been part of war going back hundreds of years, is the soldier has to be somehow recognized as having an experience that changes him or her, and they have to be helped to readjust when they come back. And the other thing is, there's such leadership potential in anybody who's been in the military. If that particular strength could be nurtured, it's incredible how valuable that is. We haven't taken full advantage of that, but again, we'll hopefully. Yes?
I'm just going to add to that last thing that you said. One of the unique problems, I think, that returning vets had was they weren't well accepted by the civilian population once they returned home. The riots were going on, the anti-war riots were going on, and I myself threw my uniforms away as soon as I got home.
Yeah.
So it seems to be quite a bit better in recent years. There's more sensitivity that the soldiers aren't making the decisions. They're just going there doing what they're told, trying to do their best.
Correct.
And, it was fairly painful.
Absolutely. Were you a Vietnam veteran? Yeah, thank you for being that. It has been one of the very painful things about the fact that, we were told to remove our uniforms when we came back because people would in some way not respect the fact that we are returning soldiers and we might be abused. And I do know, I personally wasn't, but I know a physician friend who was actually accosted by a bunch of teenagers, and he was in tears today a year ago when I talked to him. That kind of thing. There was a great difficulty with people who were against the war, and then kind of projecting that to the actual soldiers. As you know, we were doing our jobs over there at the best of our abilities, and many of the people who fought over there, again, are definitely against war, all wars. But you do your job. When you're a soldier, you basically are there doing your job, doing your best to support your country. And I just have to think that those people who were basically emotionally showing disrespect for the soldiers when they came back simply didn't. They were confusing the war with the people fighting the war. They just didn't have a real grasp for what was really going on. And I personally, I don't hold it against. It was very, very tough. I agree. Very, very hard. But at this point, I do think that we have the potential to continue the healing process. One of the good things is that we are treating our soldiers with greater respect now than they did when we came back. But people just didn't understand separating the war from the people fighting the war. And, a lot of the people who were over there realized the war, the way it was being fought, just wasn't being fought in the right way. And yet people did their best, number one, to help their buddy, number one, to do their job, number three, to stay alive and try to get home. That was the key. When they made the decision that, we're going to use a body count as a reflection of success in battle, I mean, it just somehow, there's something wrong with that. Something very wrong with that. Okay, thank you.
Did you realize that at the time, the idea of body count wasn't really going to be a measure of?
It didn't make sense to me. I did a fair amount of reading about the size of the the North Vietnamese had a population was such that they had 400,000 to 500,000 people coming to age every year. And there weren't that many people on the other side, being killed. There's no way. I think our leaders simply were making a mistake. And I think that, quite honestly, I think a lot of people over there realized there was something wrong with that particular conflict. And I particularly give them so much credit for enduring. There's a book called Enduring Vietnam, written by a fellow in Hanover, actually. And that's a great word, because this is really what the soldiers, the men and women fighting over there did. They endured it. They just put up with it, tried to get through that 365 days, or for the Marines were 13 months. And, they did an incredibly great job, and it was sad to come back and not be able to wear your uniform because you were not respected. I mean, that was really hard. I'm sure you were feeling good about the fact that you got back alive, and to have to take your uniform off and get rid of it, that's, it just isn't right. That's not what the Americans are supposed to do for their countrymen. I don't think it's going to happen again. I think that's one of the things that's come out of that war is people understand there's a difference between the war and the people fighting it. And I don't think that's going to happen again. Maybe that's one of the legacies. Got to think things good that come out of that war. There aren't too many that I can think of, but perhaps it's Vietnam has been talked about as a war, kind of a surrogate war. You've got the Chinese and the Russians supporting the North Vietnamese, and I think in the Cuban Missile Crisis, it became very close to a nuclear war. I think they realized both sides can't have a nuclear war, but maybe we can fight this other war and let some time pass, and maybe we'll relax a little bit. And I try to come up with something good about the Vietnam War. Maybe we learned some lessons finally, and maybe we bought some time so that we didn't have a nuclear holocaust. And we're still on this planet, and we've got to try to keep staying here, but maybe we bought some time and keep searching for meaning of that Vietnam War. When you've been over there, you just got to try to find meaning. And it's hard to find meaning, but I've found some. Okay, we got maybe one more question or two more questions, and then we'll clean up. Yes, please.
Did you see the series on PBS?
I saw some of it, yeah.
Some of it. What did you think of it?
Well, what I saw, I thought it did a pretty good job. I'm sorry. The question is Ken Burns' a series on Vietnam. What did I think of it? I think it was well done. I think I know there's been some emotions around it, depending upon who's watching it. Some people who were over there couldn't watch it, and others watched it with some interest and some criticism. It's hard to. Ken Burns is such a professional. He does such a good job in general. That's such a hot issue. I think he tried to find balance, and I didn't see them all. I saw probably 2/3 of them, so I can't really completely analyze them, but I thought he did a pretty good job there, in general. Yeah. I really appreciate very much everybody listening. Thank you so much, really.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tortolani, for sharing your spirit with us and also making a book recommendation. So we do have a copy of Enduring Vietnam in, if somebody would like to read it. And we don't have we don't have On Killing, but we can get it for you from another library.
That is an amazing book. It's a tough book, but it's an amazing book. I talked to Professor Wright, and actually he quoted it there a couple once. Because I didn't have enough time to spend talking with him for very long, but at any rate, this professor at Dartmouth had several students who died over there, and it bothered him so much that he went to the point in Vietnam where these people died, And he wanted to talk to as many people, men and women, who were in Vietnam when these people died, which was between the summer of '68 and the summer of '69. So, and he actually put a book in the, an ad in the Dartmouth Alumni Magazine, which I answered and called him, but I hadn't seen it until he was almost finished writing this book. But it's a well-done book, like a lot of books from Vietnam. And enduring Vietnam, it's an amazingly good word. I think enduring really hits it. You kind of just put up with it.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again.
Thank you. It was a great audience. Appreciate everybody coming. So many of my friends are here. Thank you for supporting me, my friends.
Always will.
Yeah.
Nice thick beard, though.
Yeah, natural thing. All those are natural. Is more natural. I don't think so.
Cheers, thank you.
Very many, but I helps.
Would you like that part?